Here he is.
Hey guys.
Michael Rogers.
Hey Dan.
How are you,
mate? Hey Joe. I'm doing
Mick,
well.
how are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Thanks. Nice to see you guys. You look great.
Yeah. Well, mate, you look very sharp. That's a very nice press business shirt. The probably best dressed guest we've had since Alan Davis was on here with his UCI business shirt. And you're joining the ranks with the UCI now too, mate. Tell us about your new role.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, really excited to announce just a few days ago that I'll be joining the UCI under Innovation Manager, which consists of esports, quite a lot within the equipment and clothing division. And also what hasn't really been talked about yet is also E-Mountainbike and putting down some regulation all around E-Mountainbike. So really exciting role and starting in a few weeks. So really excited.
Yeah. Hey, Dodge, has there been just since... So the first time I've ever heard of like a Zwift or whatever was when Matty Hayman won Paris-Roubaix, and he said to everyone, I was just on the rollers, and everyone's like, what? How do you train when you got a broken arm? He said, nah, this program's Zwift. And then it's really the last 4 years, I mean, and particularly with COVID, it's just exploded. I mean, how big has the growth been in such a short period of time?
Absolutely right, Dan. I mean, that's a great story about Matthew Hayman training for what was he broke his collarbone, used Zwift.
His elbow.
Yeah, that was a very unknown. It was a very unknown platform, and Scott, I'm sure you can remember the days training on the home trainer, staring up against a white wall. I mean, it was just listening to Metallica or Rage Against the Machine or something, and trying to get yourself motivated to get into those efforts. But then platforms like Zwift come along, and also kind of gamified indoor training, which makes it a little bit more exciting. You have some interaction with other people, obviously by the internet, and then the whole training platform, elements come onto it. So, and other platforms as well. You have some of your other platforms. There's a new one coming out of Emirates, United Emirates country called Whoosh. So it's a very competitive space, but I mean, it's just opened the doors to a whole lot of new people to cycling. So I think it's a really, really positive thing, and I'm really excited to see the UCI as starting to really think about it and see the potential of these sports.
Do you feel that there's still this sort of, I guess some parts of the UCI or some elements of people within the UCI holding back and not, wanting to embrace, esports or things like Zwift?
Well, I think within the UCI, they see the full potential of it. I mean, cycling has such a huge advantage over other sports in the Olympic level of being able to hold events within a virtual space. For example, you can't go for a swim virtually. You can go for a run virtually, you can row virtually. But cycling has been tinkering around with technology, home trainers. We've been into all these measurements and metrics that we have, watts. We've been playing around those within professional cycling and amateur cycling for years, for decades. And to be able to make that conversion and bring that technology all together and all those metrics into one environment and share it over the internet, I mean, it just opens up so many boundaries. I mean, we can hold cycling events in Africa. We can hold cycling events in places where setting up a physical race would be really, really difficult.
Is the concern that it's going to be sort of like the poor man's substitute for real racing? Like, you don't have the crowds, you don't have the atmosphere, you don't have, the corners and all the stuff you see live? Or will it eventually build to this grand spectator sport? Because you look at some of the esport events, they packed out the birdcage in China for esports games. That has the potential to grow, I suppose.
I think it's a progression, Dan. Road cycling, wasn't or isn't today what it was 80 years ago. I mean, and of course, in the technological space, we're going to move a lot faster. Right now, I think e-cycling, it's still in its very much infancy. I believe that the strongest rider will still win every day. You know, if you look at a guy like Rowan Dennis, who at the top of the sport was very competitive and won all the kind of hard races within the Tour de France, Tour of Hope. It's one kind of rider. The strongest rider will win every day because it's literally based on power to weight ratio. The person with the highest watts per kilo will win every day. But over time, I believe the platforms will develop, and it'll be more of the strategy elements will come into it as well. So if you look at traditional cycling, there's two factors that determine if you can win a race or not. And obviously, Scott, you know better than I do, it's legs, it's lungs, it's about your physiological side. There's a huge strategy element, you know, making sure you're able to ride in the crosswind, making sure you're able to take the corners and the descents and all those technical elements of handling your bike. And if we can, over the next 5-10 years, start to layer in some of those elements and strategy into also the kind of big game, I think it opens it up and makes the sport a lot more engaging for fans as well.
I think that's a really good point there, Mick, is that we're looking at it now and thinking, should it be in the Olympics or should it not? But in 5 years' time, even in seriously, probably in 2 or 3 years' time, the developments that will happen within the game to make it more technical will be extreme. And yeah, we'll be talking about something completely different by the time it does perhaps turn up on the Olympic platform. So,
and Mick, do you think that people need to look at it as two different products? Like it's like ping pong, table tennis, and tennis. You know, people like Iffy will be there going, hang on, it's not bloody, get him out of the road. But essentially, it's going to be a completely different product. And if you master the art of virtual racing, I mean, you could be a virtual racer, and there's nothing wrong with that. Particularly if you start getting some good virtual bank. I mean, who cares?
Exactly. And it goes back to that conversation before we're having is there could be a bunch more of fantastic and biggest talents in the world. We just don't know about them yet because they haven't had that access to cycling. The structure of cycling, which is predominantly a European sport, where all the races. So there could be, you know, a bunch of Pogacars out there or Van Lutens out there sitting in the middle of Africa or South America or anywhere spread across the globe that we don't know about yet. And I think this is where the UCI is so interested in this space because their vision is to get people on bikes. That's their role. Yep. And if we can get them on virtual bikes, if we can get them on real bikes, that's a win for cycling.
I think Johnny would be happy with maybe like if say you think about Milan San Remo, I think it was 2012 where they had where it snowed and they had to get transport on
2013.
2013.
Yeah.
So when there's conditions like that, in certain races, and if you're going to have say a virtual Milan San Remo, then all of the competitors have to say be an industrial freezer or something for the whole length of the ride, just to try and replicate the real life scenario.
Okay. Let's imagine this then. So the virtual side of the sport builds up and they never race, but they become superstars of the virtual. And then finally we'll put the two together, a bit like a virtual boxer and a real boxer. Yeah. You put them together, I'll back Mike Tyson every time. So there you go.
This is like Rocky 6, was it? You know, when he sees that virtual fight?
Well, look, I mean, John's already ahead of his game. He's already showed us how smart he is. But in all honesty, we are not, the technology is there to be able to hold a virtual race and a physical race in the same time. So all riders at the top of the sport at the Tour de France and all the big races, they have a box on the back of their bike, the Velon box, which is that's recording all their information. It has their GPS position. I mean, that's information that all could be potentially beamed, you know, via the internet through the, you know, into one of the platforms. It could be Swift, it could be another one. Okay, and the software producers replicate that exact course, And all of a sudden, you're at home taking part in the last 20 kilometres of the Tour de France.
Now you're talking.
Oh, you've got Johnny excited.
But that's exciting. It's not going away. That's combining the two. That's what I'm talking about. That's where it works. I love it.
This is where we have to start to think a little bit outside of the box and start to interact with younger generations, because all of a sudden, cycling complains that we don't have tickets, we don't have a stadium, we don't have ticket entry. We don't have fans being able to come to our races and pay an entry fee to sit on a plastic chair and be able to watch the cyclists. All of a sudden, virtual cycling has the potential to be able to create some kind of business revenue for the teams and the race organizers and the platforms and the sponsors. It creates a ecosystem, that cycling hasn't been able to develop in traditional road cycling, that can be divided and amongst all the stakeholders and enable cycling to finally become self-sufficient and not so dependent on corporate sponsorship.
We've got another comment, and this is something that we flagged the other night, and it's from Jamie Anderson. He says, for many people in developing markets, a smart trainer is still very expensive. How do you see access evolving to identify talents in places like Asia and Africa?
So I speak to a lot of people that say to get involved with esports is still quite expensive. I've just dished out a lot of money to buy a good bike, my clothing, and if I have to dish out another, another 1,500 Aussie dollars to buy a trainer, then, that's just another load that I'm not willing to take. For me, it becomes kind of access to equipment. Will there be financing opportunities out there for companies and for privates to be able to go and rent a home trainer? Because that's maybe something that we at the UCI need to think about, is how can we get home trainers out to as many people as possible? So I think we have to think about it a little bit differently compared to the traditional cycling kind of buy your bike and fly over to Europe and buy all your hotel rooms. And like Scott, you could tell a million stories about that. But don't you think also cycling, it almost struggles a lot with what I call elitism.
Yeah.
And it's an extremely elite sport with a high barrier to entry. And I can remember as a kid growing up in Canberra, I'd go out like everyone does in Australia at 5 o'clock in the morning, and in Canberra that was tough. During the winter it was freezing cold. Your bin was frozen within 10 minutes. But I can remember people yelling at me, and I was 10 years old, that I couldn't ride properly in the bunch, and I lacked those skills to be able to ride with that elite group. And that's a big jump, to starting cycling and having that and being able to acquire those skills to be able to ride a level where at the bunch where it's going, down the road at 50 kilometers an hour. That's tough. And cycling has always been a really, really elite sport. And if we're going to continue to grow our numbers, I think we have to look at ourselves in the face a little bit and say, let's bring this elitism down so we can get out to those people and people can have this smooth path into getting into our lovely sport.
Well, that's what we've tried to do on the Detour, mate. We've tried to eliminate all aspects of elitism, and we've really tried to just bring the level down and just people don't feel intimidated. Isn't that right, John?
Yeah, but Mick's stuffing it up a bit. He's trying to take it up too much of a level. We won't have him back.